We got the fight last night when we started talking about it.
So don't forget this. Don't forget this whole idea of social unity. Real fast. So we already know how awful total war is and targeting civilians and trying to use terror. But the big thing about total war is that would be an excuse by saying we got to stop the enemy to enforce social unity to ban free speech, and that's how you create totalitarian states. Did we get this?
We got to a point, total war justifies.
Oh no, we got to this.
This was like before.
Yeah, this is before. I'm just reviewing this. I'm reviewing this.
So we got
We got to this. I was just reviewing this.
the next slide.
So let's get to this. Total war, and now like almost like a new rule. Before, like in 1914, there are certain things they would have thought civilized people should never do. Should never do. But once you adopt total war, they would become justified, almost like a new rule for war. And it would slowly take some time as a way to break the stalemate. And the first one will be poison gas. So the Germans did it first against Russian forces in what is now Poland. Hey, it's a world war. And they literally would open up canisters of chlorine gas and just hope the wind was blowing in the right direction. These are the canisters. And it was all kinds of problem with it. Chlorine gas is lighter than air, so it dissipate pretty fast, but it did totally panic the Russians. And so they used it for the first time on the Western Front in Belgium against Canadian forces for a war. The Canadian forces broke and ran. You just started breathing in this chlorine gas, started burning their throat, and it just hurt their eyes, mass panic. But the Germans did not exploit the breakthrough. They didn't think it would work that well. And that night, the Allies had known gas might be coming. And so they had something prepared. To deal with chlorine gas, wear a mask. And they've known about germ theory and how effective masks are for years. They're not 100%, but effective, especially if other people are wearing it. But they needed more. Anybody know what else they had to do to make it effective against chlorine gas? What? Can't really purify this whole. What was the filter? They urinated. And so you breathe through that, and that alleviated some of the problems. Now, I'm going to agree that that is gross, but don't forget something. At least it's like you do it to your own. Right? It's not like one guy doing it for the entire company, hey, drink 40 gallons and then take care of these. No. So at least you got that in common. So very quickly, both sides adopted gas masks. And by 1916, both sides had adopted gas shells to fire from artillery. So you can actually lob the shells onto the enemy. And they still find these shells all the time with degraded gas in it. And the gases changed dramatically as the war went on to more and more deadly and effective gases. So are we on poison gas already? So by 1918, over 30%, over a third of all shells fired were gas shells. And it was more just to make for the misery on both sides. Because the problem was this. It's going to be really hard to attack into gas, even if you have a gas mask. And as miserable as wearing a gas mask is, you can still fight in it. Therefore, it didn't break the skill. Gas did not break it. It just made the war worse. And because it did not break the stalemate, that's part of the reason it wasn't used a lot in World War II. But here are German soldiers with gas masks. And I'm showing you this for a reason. First off, here is the German 1916 helmet. This helmet was made in 1918. And it was actually taken off of a battlefield in late April of 1945 in Italy during World War II. So the German World War II helmet is slightly different, a little bit higher quality steel, so it's a bit lighter. But during World War II, they needed everything, so they pulled out the stock of old World War I helmets that were around. So this was being used by German soldiers in World War II, but it's a World War I helmet. And it's steel. Now, the problem is it had a woolen little band around it. Then you would put it over your forage hat. But the woolen band finally fell off. So we're looking for glue to put it back on. And you can see why I don't really want you to wear it, because it's kind of sharp the way they put that on. So it's heavy. Imagine, I'll pass it around. Imagine wearing this for 12 hours. I can't even 1 hour. So it's heavy. Here is a British helmet. and the Americans would use this too. And it's a little bit lighter, it's not, even the leather, it's not as protective. The leather has been so petrified after over 100 years that it's kind of shrunk to this hard thing. But the idea was you'd wear it and shrapnel coming down, that's why I had this. The Americans wear a helmet like this, and then eventually have another cover over the top, until 1942. That's being the American. It's a lot like the British and the American helmet. If you look near Luke, look, hold up that's the World War II helmet. The US would have that to the 80s. It was given to them. They were given.
It was a gift. Like, did you do that?
Yes, it's someone who knew I was a teacher, did that. And their grandfather or their father got it off of the Niddle. Yeah, it's their father.
They were just fine with it.
Well, just abandoned by German soldiers, and they picked it up, it's a souvenir. I knew these people who kept all these like Nazi flags and German medals, they're a little problematic, but at the same time, it's complex, it's also great history. All right, so back to this. Do you see the German soldier then? Everyone look at the German soldier and if you pass that around. I guess if you're wearing a hat, you could wear it, but you can see how the German helmet's kind of sharp on the inside, there's little fans holding it. That's why don't put it on. You see this? Does that look familiar? So there's a young movie director who just graduated from USC in film. And he was gonna make, actually, he had already made a couple other movies. And he was writing a screenplay for a movie, kind of a sci-fi adventure thing. And he's trying to figure out what to put the villain in. Anybody know what I'm talking about? This is 1974. And he was a student of history also, had his history degree and film. Who am I referring to? Guy's name's George Lucas, and that's Darth Vader.
Oh.
Darth Vader is a German. You see Darth Vader in the Star Wars? That's a German. It's based on a German with a gas mask. And the Stormtroopers helmet, same way. In fact, took the name Stormtroopers from, I'll tell you where that came from. Monday? So, moving on. So here, British soldier, German, those are Americans training with gas. By 1918, both sides were using gas. Those actually through tear gas. It was more of a weapon of terror. Please don't. But here are the main gases that were used in World War I. Tear gases, relatively ineffective. Chlorine burnt the throat, but it was too light. Phosgene is really dangerous, but it's lighter air, so it dissipates. The most effective, and therefore the worst gas, was mustard gas. Mustard gas, so that's the gas you do need to know, it's mustard gas. If I ask any question about gas, it'll be about mustard. Mustard gas was kind of yellowish, it smelled like a spoiled egg, rotten eggs. And the thing is that it was heavier than air. So it would float along the ground and would go, I'll just come back. I'll just leave it up. And it would go into trenches. And in fact, it would sit in the soil for a long time. So even if it was 3 days after the attack, if your skin was contacted with mustard gas, it would burn the skin. It's called a blistering agent, and it would literally burn your skin. Bubble and kind of, it would like, if you got really high concentration, like bubble and burst your skin, which had to be just unbelievably painful. That's not the bad part. If it did that to your skin, what's it going to do to your eyes? Oh. And what's it going to do to your throat? What's it going to do to your lungs? If you have enough of that in your lungs, you will drown your own blood in about, depends how long, how much you have. But there's stories of people drowning because of mustard gas in their own blood a week after they contact. So they must have went through absolute hell. So that's an American soldier. See the blisters from mustard gas. Here are French soldiers putting a mustard gas shell, and those are British soldiers blinded by gas. Some would get their sight back, some partial. A guy who got a partial sight back after being blinded by gas in the summer of 1918 was this guy we mentioned before, Adolf Hitler. He actually ended the war in a hospital in Bavaria, blinded. by mustard gas. He would gain some of this like that, but not 100%. This is going to be really important for Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was blinded. The German army was still intact and fighting. He never witnessed the collapse of the German army. October 1918. So from his point of view, we were never beaten. And he would be a firm believer of the myth that Germany never lost. Except there was an enemy within. You know who those enemies were? Actually, Jews were the leaders of the enemy. Socialists and communists. Those were the enemy of the Nazis. But they were led by Jews. So, there was a dog with a gas mask. Horse. Here's the point. It didn't break the stalemate. But then it hit the planners. What if we drop gas on civilians? It became a perfect weapon for terror. The 1919 plan for the Allies, if the war were to continue, was to lay millions of gallons of gas on the big German industrial cities along the Rhine River, like Cologne and Koblenz and Stuttgart and the Ruhr Valley like Dusseldorf, to terrify civilians. That's why here you have kids in 1940 preparing for the inevitable gas attack. And that's a British nurse showing how the gas mask would work for an infant. So you would put it in there, and since they weren't strong enough to breathe on their own, you had to constantly pump air. See how that's the pump. Now, since gas was so ineffective, they didn't use it in World War I that much. Neither side did. But once you make the logical jump in total war, which they did in 1919, to use it on civilians, once World War II began, they're like, okay, what do we use? Okay, gas didn't work very well. But what about jelly gasoline called napalm, or white phosphorus that burns whenever it hits oxygen and will burn until it runs out of fuel? You dump water on it, it burns faster. If it hits the skin, oh, it's got lots of oxygen there. Burn right through the body. One of the most horrible weapons you can imagine. Isn't it an easy jump, poison gas to white phosphorus on civilians? And once you decide you can burn people alive, is it really a big step to go from there to? Once you make that logical step, that everything is okay to attack the home front. Okay. And that's what planners were thinking. They firebombed Japanese cities already and killed over 1 million civilians. Japan was near surrender, trying to get out of the war. The United States still dropped 2 atomic bombs. Total war. So, and here is some yahoo who decided to get a tattoo of a gas mask. And this is why I put this up. First off, I want to be clear, this is one thing about tattoos. That's not going to wash off. Secondly, if you ever see somebody who has that, what should your reaction be? Run away. Run away. Do not engage. Something wrong. And they want you to engage. Don't engage. Moving on. I'll show you another tattoo a little later on. Starvation blockade. Now, there have been starvation, there have been sieges of cities going back 5,000 years. But this is the planned starvation, not just cutting off of goods for war, to starve the population of the enemy cities. And that will lead to the Allied starvation blockade and the German attempt with unrestricted submarine warfare, which I'll get to in just a second. This is a really important graph because it shows the percentage of imported foods for Germany. So right before the war, almost 40% was imported. That means you cut that off. That's massive food shortages. And they handled it horrible. The Germans were handled it as incompetent as you can imagine. The British were better, but look, 80% of their food was imported. You could cut that off even just 1 or 2%, that's starvation. And so that became the plan. I should add one more thing. Germany got 70% of their fertilizer from the New World, from South America and America. And that's, of course, going to be cut off. So, starvation blockade. So the Allied blockade, here as we mentioned, here. And what they would do is, this is the rules of war. And there had been international court created. They try to come up with like rules of blockade, whatever rules of war. So if a British destroyer saw a merchant ship on the way, looked like it was going to Germany, they'd stop them up here. And then they would board the ship. And if they're going to Germany, they would check it for anything that could be used for the German war, which meant everything. You're going to Germany, we're going to stop you. And basically, two choices. They either have to turn around and go to a neutral port or back home, or they can scuttle the ship. You know what I mean by scuttle? They sink the ship. That means they make sure the crew is safe, either to take on board your ship or put them on lifeboats with enough food. Everyone got that? So they're not going to kill the civilian crewmen of these merchant ships. That's a big thing. There's like rules. They're not going to kill them. But they can do that out here. The British have the most powerful fleet. Next, that's the rule. By 1915, they'd cut off almost all food going into Germany. By 1916, there are food riots. All of these began the first food riots. And the Germans just handled them such incompetence, it's kind of mind-boggling. For example, the Germans killed all their stock animals. Killed them all in 1916, thinking they'll use less forage and so they'll have more grains and food for the people. Insanely stupid. It backfired so bad. But anyways, and there started to be starvation, and people started to die. Estimates have over 120,000 people died in 1916 alone. By 1918, almost 300,000 German civilians died of starvation. If you count Austria in this blockade, over 1.5 million civilians died of starvation. And what age groups are going to be the most affected by this? Yeah, you children. So anybody younger than 20. I mean, you're at the age you require significantly more calories than I do. Because you're growing faster, your mind is growing. You need more. You know, it's just the way it is. Or when you're elderly and you're more susceptible to illness by not having by malnutrition. Here are bakeries in Berlin that were attacked during food riots. Here is a horse that died in Berlin, and they are just surrounding it, cutting off pieces. Yes, that's the lump of guts and everything, and that's all going to be eaten. Soon there'll be nothing but a carcass, and many of the bones we take, chip those, and use the marrow, or use it for soup. And so that's starvation. Thousands would die. And think about it. If you're talking about 20 years and younger, that means everybody born from about 1900 to the end of the war, they called it, and get this down, the starvation generation. That's what it's known as in Germany. Especially babies, kids. That's, gee, how old are they going to be in the 1920s and 1930s? Gee, I wonder if there'll be any right-wing authoritarian parties that can recruit the starvation generation. So, last thing for today, really quick. While that's going on, Germany used submarines. They didn't have very many submarines. They didn't have very good ones either. But since they couldn't blockade Britain, remember, Britain required almost 80% of their food came from imports. That would be their attempt to blockade. Now, submarines, the German language is very literal. Unterseeboot, U-boat, under the water boat. Very little. That's the German language. For example, here's a German word. Backflying. Yeah, German, you gotta say it like that, right? And that literally means a face that is deserving to be punched. And that is like the greatest name, because how many, we all know people who has the face. That's a face that deserves. Some of you might have that face. I know some of you are looking right at me and saying, but back to this really quick, last thing. Here's the problem with submarines. Submarines, their only defense is hiding under the water. They have no armor because they have really small engines, and they have to be under the water, and they can only stay under the water for about 20 hours. They run out of oxygen. So they have to stay under the water. If they surface and stop a ship like this German U-boat did here, aren't they vulnerable? All it takes is one hole in a submarine, and they're done. Oh yeah, they can submerge, they just keep submerging to the bottom. And so, do you see the problem with submarines? If you have very few, what is unrestricted submarine warfare? Don't warn them, don't stop them. Sink merchant ships without warning. Everyone got that? Sink without warning. Yeah, they didn't have great submarines, but they would eventually make pretty good ones.
From submarine, this is going down, it's coming back up.
Yeah, good point. Surfacing can be a problem. By the way, a submarine is a boat. If it's on the surface of the water, it's a ship. Yeah. You say it the other way around, or unless it's a little like a raft, then it's a boat too. That's if you know anybody in the Navy, they'll get very mad at you. Very mad at you. Great day. It's gonna be tough. One more day without me. I'm impressed though. Yeah. You too, Tim. I'll get them all. Everybody check teams. I forgot to tell you something. I'm getting old and overwhelmed.
No.
Oh, okay. I might. Get in there, get to work. The stock market is tanking. The pound is sinking. Oh dear. No, that's science. That's good stuff. So my role play. I'm gonna play making middle finger even more holes. I'm not really good at it. Don't lie, it's part of it.
Too loud. Too loud. That's a good one.
Looks pretty good.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Just come, I think you sit for that. Go pretty well. Are you good with the presentation thing?
Yeah, I don't know what else like.
Thousand St. Beats. A variant replay. The market's bottom and all.
But you just want to be like. Chill.
She's so dramatic.
You guys can find me. Are you ready? Well.
They did not pass that.
That was so.
But it's making sense.
No,
No,
oh, wait, no, that's.
I felt bad, but then.
Hey, let's do a quiz. Half sheet of paper, number 1 to 10. Want you to do that? Yeah. The market's bottom is.
Yes.
The S&P 500, which is probably the best measure of its problem. Yeah, people are just freaking. And that means, they're investing in like US Treasury bills. I mean, because at least so far, the United States always pays back instead.
Because of the tariffs.
Partially, but a lot of it's insecurity too. But also, I mean, we're having a massive wave of people losing their job. Yeah, the economy is. It took a month and a half for it to go from being predicted to be a massive increase to a massive decrease. A month and a half. Tell you what, that's kind of a crap. Good point. We had a month and a half to watch this decline. Doesn't mean it will happen, boy, it looks. Number one, two, wait for it, Ben. If you're wondering, and I know you are, I got 100% on this quiz. 100%. Nailed it. I might give myself a bonus because I'm so proud of myself.